Cybernetics and Psychology, a Personal Journey. In the small town, if you're not a relative, you don't belong. When we moved to a small town, the other children only spoke to my children to swear at them. When we left, the principal of the school made the whole school apologize. When we returned to the city, the aversion to school remained. They preferred staying in bed. The truant officers were pounding on the door. Control. How do you control children? Behaviorism claims to have the answer to controlling people. It is based on scientific materialism. There are no intentions, goals, or purposes. Intention is a fallacy. The only things that are real are matter and energy. Energy or force applied to a material object produces control. Behaviorism doesn't work. In the real world, living beings respond to being pushed around by pushing back. It's called war. If a parent adopts behaviorism as a strategy, it turns the family into a war zone. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. As we desperately search for the stimulus that would cause the desired response, our children felt like guinea pigs in an experiment. We turned to Gregory Bateson and threw Bateson to Cybernetics to find an alternative. Cybernetics is the study of control. In cybernetics, control is a function of communication. Cybernetics is almost the exact opposite of behaviorism. In behaviorism, children have no intentions, no purposes or goals, are controlled by outside forces, are mathematically predictable, do not have ideas, and do not communicate. Cybernetic systems, on the other hand, have purposes, seek to control their environment, make decisions, process information, and communicate. Cybernetic systems have many of the characteristics usually attributed to mind. Minds have purposes, values, goals, seek to control their environment, make decisions, process information, and communicate. Cybernetic systems also have purposes, seek to control their environment, make decisions, process information, and communicate. Children are not objects to be manipulated. Children are people. They have minds of their own. Communication and control in the animal and the machine. The mind is not a black box where we can only understand the stimulus and the response. Because we understand the structure of a cybernetic system, we can understand the basic mental processes. Act, sense, evaluate, choose. A control process is a decision-making process. In a control system, power is the ability to make a decision. A cybernetic control system is a communication process. A control process consists of 4 translation processes. Differences are translated by models into perceptions, which are translated by values into needs, which are translated by options into messages, which are translated by the environment into differences. Models, values, options, and the environment are the self-referential or meta level of control, the process that controls the controls. Communication controls matter and energy. You get in the car and drive. You check the speedometer to see how fast you're going. You check the speed limit. That tells you whether you need to speed up or slow down. The gas or the brakes then send a message to the car to speed up or slow down. Once you get the car up to the desired speed, you can set the cruise control, and that will control the speed automatically. The cybernetic control loop describes control in both the animal and the machine. Communication. Meaning is a function of the context. The word cool has a different meaning in a refrigerator than it has in jazz. What a word means in my idea set is not necessarily what that word means in your idea set. Communication is a constant search for harmony. The communication is successful when the words have the same meaning for the sender and the receiver. Harmonizing is work. Communication. When two self-controlled systems meet, they communicate and form community. Because information is categorical, they become part of a larger whole that contains them both. This process of communication and symbiosis allows information systems to evolve and grow new and more complex and more abstract forms, and thus cooperation. Functional roles. The whole is also a control process. The individuals in community will begin to define functional roles to achieve a more effective control process for the whole. Hierarchical systems. Because information is categorical, it is also hierarchical. As a whole is made up of parts, so each of the parts is a whole to its own parts. Arthur Kessler coined the term holon to describe this dual quality of wholes. Since the parts are themselves wholes, they form nested holarchies. Holon communication. In order for a holarchy to function, it has to communicate between the various levels of the holarchy. Decisions at the higher levels will program the control processes at the lower levels. The social programming of an individual's models, values, and options is referred to as enculturation, indoctrination, training, or education, depending on the context. The culture enculturates the nation indoctrinates the citizen, the institution trains the worker, the family educates the student, the individual learns from the environment. When I was 20 years old, I wrote my philosophy of life. It was years later that I realized that it was not my philosophy, but the cliches of my culture. Part of the misery that I create was programmed by my culture, my country, my profession, and my family. Dysfunctional processes. We can look at the traditional psychiatric disorders as breakdowns in the translation processes. Dysfunctional models will give us a distorted picture of our environment, which can be a stalled distortion, climate change is a hoax, or an extreme distortion involving hallucinations and delusions. Dysfunctional values will give us a distorted evaluation of our environment, which can be a small negativity, phobias, or an extreme valuation involving an obsession or addiction. Dysfunctional options will give us a distorted picture of our alternatives, which can be a sense that there's only one option, compulsion, or a sense that there are no options, depression, or infinite options, mania. Dysfunctional environments can drive people crazy. Bateson talked about double-blind messages driving people schizophrenic. The popular term is gaslighting. Martin Seligman showed that locking a dog in a cage and giving it electric shocks could induce depression. This was my children's experience of small-town life and what Native children experienced in residential schools. A short note on drugs. Matter and energy are the media of information and communication. If you damage the medium, then you will damage its ability to transmit the message. The body generates a number of chemical message systems. Some drugs imitate the message system, for example, insulin and hormones, but most drugs work to disrupt them. beta blockers, ACE inhibitors, alcohol. If you have someone with highly dysfunctional mental processes, you want to disrupt them. People who live in misery will turn to drugs to disrupt their misery. Alcohol appears to disrupt the part of the brain that controls inhibitions. This can be a happy thing or a tragic thing. The self-control process. Living things are not only aware of their environment, they are aware of themselves and can change themselves. Self-conscious or reflexive decision-making takes the process to the meta level. Since programs are information, we can become aware of the programming and make decisions about the translators so that the models are true, the values are healthy, and the options have requisite variety. In the example, to change a model, we look to meta models to perceive our models, modeling values to assess them, and alternative models to create change. The therapeutic relationship. Cognitive therapies depend on a therapeutic relationship. The key to the therapeutic relationship is love. The first aspect of love is simply respect. The listening therapy is a way of showing respect. I call this watching people learn. Every problem is a decision waiting to be made. What are the options expressed in the dilemma? If you can get clear in your mind what their dilemma is and check that with them, then they can get clearer about the problem. Apply appropriate models. What are the probable results of each option? Every decision is an exercise in values clarification. What are the values implied by the options? A decision will emerge. The second aspect of love is belonging. When true self-controlled systems meet, they communicate and they form a small community with two members. Communication means that they will harmonize. This is belonging. It sets the stage for suggestion. The most extensively documented cognitive therapy is the placebo effect. The doctor tells the patient that the pill will cure them. Hypnotists call this a suggestion. The patient is cured. Intervention therapies. More directive therapies seek to reprogram the meta level. The simplest is to suggest a greater variety of options. Cognitive therapy focuses on changing models. This is sometimes called reframing. Virginia Satir, the family therapist, would get very, very specific and then suggest a different interpretation of the event. On the other hand, Milton Erickson, a hypnotherapist, would tell stories, and the stories would suggest to the client a new framework of interpretation. Changing values is a religious conversion, a change of identity. Changing the core Western values of selfishness, greed, and irresponsibility will require a religious revival. The mind-body problem. Materialism as a philosophy created the mind-body problem. If only matter and energy are objectively real, but we do have minds, what is the relationship? Most people settle for a fuzzy dualism. The brain has ideas, the real world is matter and energy. The 20th century produced two different solutions. The telecommunications solution. Matter and energy are the media of information and communication. And the cybernetic solution. Information and communication control matter and energy. May I suggest the figure ground solution? When we are aware of information and communication, it is the figure against the background of matter and energy. On the other hand, when we are aware of matter and energy, that is the figure against the background of information and communication. Mathematics is neither matter nor energy. It is information.